Second Amendment. Opponents, like the group Americans for Responsible Solutions, co-founder, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, says it, quote, moves Georgia out of the mainstream. Even Georgia's Association of Police Chiefs is speaking out against the law. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez joins me now from Ellijay, Georgia, where the governor is set to sign this bill. We see some people gathered there now. Gabe, talk to me about the debate within the state surrounding this.
Well, hi there, Tamron. Good morning. Yeah, as you mentioned, we're here in a very politically conservative area of Georgia. It is the home district of the Georgia House Speaker, and Governor Nathan Deal will sign this controversial bill into law within the next half hour or so. As you can see behind me, about 100 people or so have already gathered here to watch him do it. Now, here's what this new law will do. It will allow licensed gun owners in Georgia to carry their weapons into more places. As you mentioned, Tamron, bars. Before this new law, you couldn't bring firearms inside bars unless the bar owner specifically gave you permission. This new law would shift that emphasis. It would reverse that emphasis, and you could now bring your gun into a bar if you have a permit, unless the property owner tells you to leave. Now, with churches, before it was illegal to bring guns into churches, but church leaders will now be able to decide whether their congregations can bring weapons into places of worship. As for schools, this new law provides a framework for how school boards can now authorize and appoint staffers to carry guns into schools. And as for airports, as you mentioned, Tamron, not only can you carry in common areas of the airport, but you can also now, if you take your gun accidentally, and you have a permit, if you take it accidentally to airport security, you can pick up your gun and leave without a criminal penalty. You can also bring your gun, if you have a permit, into government buildings that are unsecured. In other words, that they don't have a security checkpoint. This is creating a lot of controversy even within the law enforcement community. And once Governor Nathan Deal signs this bill, again in about another half hour, it will take effect July 1st, Tamron.
Gabe, proponents of the bill unsuccessfully pushed the bill in 3 previous legislative sessions. However, it passed this year. You point out it's a conservative part of the country, but even in conservative regions or cities and states, I think a lot of people would perhaps wonder why, for example, a gun would be allowed in a church, or if someone brought a gun into an airport, that they would not face any criminal penalty. Even those who certainly might support the idea of allowing people to have a gun in some of the places listed outside of, for example, a church.
Well, Tamron, you bring up an interesting point. Several polls have indicated that the majority of Georgians were opposed to this bill, but it was able to pass this year, even though it had been brought up in several previous legislative sessions. They were able to get compromises in several of the most controversial provisions, including the ability to carry guns on college campuses. That was originally in the bill, but when it passed on the last day of the legislative session, by that point, it had been taken out of the bill. Several Democrats, including the grandson of President Jimmy Carter, Jason Carter, who's also running for governor as a Democrat, he voted for this bill. So with Governor Nathan Deal running for re-election, this is all a very politically charged climate here in Georgia, and conservatives saw this as a way to sort of rally their base. And as you have mentioned, the NRA has called this a historic victory for the Second Amendment, Tamron.
All right, Gabe, thank you very much.
Critics are calling it the Guns Everywhere bill, but its official name is the Safe Carry Protection Act.
To say that I am now allowed to bring a gun to church, to say that I am able to bring a gun into an unsecured government building, you know, if that isn't extreme, I don't know what is.
Churches, schools, not necessarily the places you associate with carrying guns. But just minutes ago, the governor of Georgia signed an unprecedented new bill that fundamentally changes where guns are allowed and the defense you can give if you fire one. Its official name is the Safe Carry Protection Act. Critics call it, though, the Guns Everywhere bill. The NRA has labeled it a victory. Whatever you want to call it, here's what it does. Schools. The law authorizes school districts to appoint staffers to carry firearms. Churches. They can opt in and allow weapons at mass. Airports. If you want to bring a gun to a security checkpoint, you can pick it up with no criminal penalty. Supporters in Georgia's legislature insist House Bill 60 is about restoring Second Amendment rights and Georgians protecting Georgians.
Well, I cannot begin to explain the reasons for which someone might seek to take the life of another. I believe wholeheartedly that Georgians, should they wish to take responsibility for the safety of themselves and their family, they should have that option.
Opponents, on the other hand, argue that it promotes a gun culture in this country. Americans for Responsible Solutions, the group co-founded by former Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, called it the most extreme gun bill in America. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez is in LJ, where the governor just signed the bill into law. Gabe, thank you for joining us. At a time where there is this fierce national debate in favor of strengthening gun control, what's the reaction in Georgia to a new law that seems to do just the opposite?
Well, hi there, Ronan. As you mentioned, that gun bill signing ceremony just wrapped up. At least here in this part of Georgia, this is the home district of the Georgia House Speaker, very politically conservative. There was quite a large turnout here, several hundred people. And the speakers highlighted the provisions you just mentioned, and also several other lesser-known provisions, including that this bill prevents the state from creating and maintaining a database of licensed weapons carriers, and the bill also eliminates the fingerprinting requirement for renewing gun licenses. Now, since Newtown, the gun debate has escalated. According to the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, more than 1,500 gun-related bills were introduced last year, though only 123 of them became law. And so far this year, 10 states have enacted laws strengthening gun regulations. Georgia now becomes the 9th state to pass laws weakening them. Now, one of the most controversial parts of the bill that's getting a lot of attention, not just here in Georgia, but around the country and really around the world, is the implications for Georgia's stand your ground laws. And that actually is still being debated. The bill's critics say that this law now expands stand your ground, the stand your ground defense for felons. They cite a Georgia Senate Research Council analysis saying as much. However, the bill's backers say not so fast. They say that that analysis is misinterpreting the bill, and they say that there's really nothing new when it comes to stand your ground in this bill, and that just because a felon can ask for immunity does not mean that a judge can actually grant that immunity. So the debate rages on here. Now that the governor has signed it, this law takes effect July 1st. Ronan, back to you.
We'll see what kind of repercussions this has around the country. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez, thanks so much for that. So, as we just heard from Gabe, supporters of this bill say it defends the Second Amendment according to the wishes of ordinary Georgians. But it also matters that some of the players closest to this issue are actually fighting the bill and saying it's going to cost lives. That includes the law enforcement community, the guys actually dealing with the consequences of gun violence. The executive director of the Georgia Association of Police Chiefs said, quote, "Police officers do not want more people carrying guns on the street, particularly police officers in inner city areas." It also extends to religious leadership, the pastors whose churches this bill will allow guns into. 65 religious leaders fought against this bill becoming law. Among them, the Reverend who leads Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church, and is the church where civil rights icon Martin Luther King Jr. once preached, and the church where mourners lined up by the hundreds to walk past his casket when his life was cut short by a gun. Reverend Warnock, senior pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, joins me today from Atlanta. Thank you so much, sir, for taking the time to talk about this issue. I wanted to ask you, given your church's powerful and personal connection to this long debate surrounding gun violence, what was the church community's reaction when you first learned that guns would be allowed at Mass?
Thank you so much, Ronan. It's good to be here with you. Yes, we have felt this in a particular way at Ebenezer Baptist Church. People will know that Dr. King, of course, was a victim of gun violence, but so was his mother in 1974 while she was playing and singing the Lord's Prayer in our sanctuary. Tragically, a young man who needed mental health care and had access to a gun but not mental health care came into our church, killed her and one of our deacons. And here we are some 40 years later, and in the state of Georgia and across our country, tragically, people have more access to guns than they do to mental health care. And so we're very concerned not only about our churches, we're concerned about our young people. One of the things that really needs to be lifted up in this debate is that most gun deaths in the United States are suicide. And so on our college campuses, where now you get little more than a slap on the wrist because of this terrible bill which the governor signed today, I'm worried that tragically we're going to see more suicides on college campuses, and universities. I hope I'm wrong, but I think the governor needs to think about that, even as he's enjoying a barbecue now in LJ, Georgia, compliments of the gun lobby.
And you obviously have had this very personal link to the issue. Is that what motivated you to come out in such a public way against this particular bill?
Well, I mean, if you look at the data, if the pervasiveness of firearms would make a nation safer, then the United States of America, in terms of gun violence, should be one of the safest countries in the world, and it's not. We certainly need to be in a much better place than we are today. And as you look at this law here in Georgia, I'm concerned about this issue, but I'm also concerned about the larger implications. As was indicated in the lead up to my interview, law enforcement officers think this is a bad idea. Faith leaders think it's a bad idea. We didn't ask for guns in our churches. I know of no denominational groups that lobbied for this legislation. The college and university presidents oppose it. And so it begs the question, at whose behest is this legislation coming? I submit to you that we have the best politicians that money can buy, and our politicians on both sides of the aisle are increasingly owned by the gun lobby. And after Newtown and all of the violence that happens in inner cities in Atlanta, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, and other places, we have to stand up and make it clear that we will remember this come November.
Reverend, are you going to defy this law and ban guns in your own church?
Oh, absolutely. We will not allow firearms in our churches. I should say to you that the gun lobby actually wanted this gun law in terms of churches. It's now opt-in. They wanted it to be opt-out, which would have meant that we would have had to have a sign on our church saying no guns allowed. In this case, we indicate that we don't intend to opt in, but I think it's still a bad idea. I'm Baptist, and so our churches operate by congregational polity, and so this introduces a kind of dissension in our churches where boards will have to vote and decide whether to allow guns or not in their churches. We didn't have this problem. We didn't ask for it. Georgia has a number of issues that we need to deal with. We have the 5th highest number of uninsured individuals in the state of Georgia. The governor, as he signs this legislation, could have taken that same pen and agreed to give some 600,000 Georgians Medicaid through the Medicaid expansion of the Affordable Care Act, and yet we've chosen guns over health care. It's the wrong set of values, and most Georgians, even Republicans, agree with us, and yet here we are today.
All right, well, thank you so much, Reverend. You make this argument in the face of a lot of impassioned defenders of the Second Amendment in your state. It'll be interesting to see how this continues to play out, but you highlight in a very, very vivid way some of the negative consequences.